Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind's Screamacelica. It's me, Paul John Dykes, and my old compadre, Kevin Graham. What's the story, Jimmy McGrory?
I don't know. I'm just 6.5 hours late for the boat in the day, and I'm 15 minutes late for this. But that's like, that's just the way I roll.
This is the way you roll with it, mate. But listen, we've been waiting long enough for this episode of Screamacelica, so I'm sure people don't mind waiting a wee few minutes more. We're going to be talking, obviously, about a memorable album release and a memorable season, Kev, which actually produced nothing in terms of silverware, but it showed that we were on the right track, or we felt that we were on the right track back in 95, 96. See, when you look back on an album like this, you've not listened to it for a while, perhaps, because I don't know about you, but at the time, it was an album I listened to every single day, sometimes several times a day. But 20, 30 years later, when you've been listening to an album so much, you just tap into it. You know, the way you listen to music's a wee bit different. Tracks might pop up on compilations or playlists, etc. I've not listened to this album all the way through for several years until today. How about yourself?
I'm probably the same as you. I think, when was its 25th anniversary? That came out was probably the last time I heard it from start to finish. And that was on Six Music. I think they played it from start to finish.
Right.
That was the last time. It's interesting when you say that everything was, you listen to the album every couple of times a day, or at least a couple of times a week. I wouldn't really say I listened to it. I would probably say it was there wherever I went for that period. So
without a doubt,
it wasn't that you were putting it on, it was there. I mean, it didn't matter. It was a sort of crossover album.
Definitely was.
It's one of those, if you step back a couple of years, I remember going to Blackpool with my old work for a weekend. And I'm in a nightclub and they're playing Girls and Boys. And I'm gone, I never expected to be in a absolutely dingy, crappy nightclub hearing a Blur record. And at that point, I kind of knew, there's a crossover happening here, there's a wider appeal, and What's the Story, Morning Glory just took it to another level. Whether it deserved to take it to another level is another thing.
We will be discussing that this evening, Kevin. Why are we talking about What's the Story, Morning Glory? Well, we decided quite some time ago we were going to do an Oasis LP club, and we did the first show on Definitely Maybe, and an album that I think changed everything in terms of my own music listening life soundtrack. My youth, I was still at school at the time. I was still at school when this came out, Kevin, and the plan was to go through all the LPs. We might finally do that, but at this moment in time, we're going to do the second album by Oasis, and then tomorrow we're going to do the third, much maligned, often maligned, Be Here Now. But yeah, at this point, there was a wave, there was a tsunami of interest in Oasis. They had released Definitely Maybe to critical acclaim. It has gone on to sell something like 11 million copies, but at the time, it was a huge, huge album, Kevin. And they very quickly came up with What's the Story, Morning Glory. And what I found interesting at the time, we'll get on to B-sides and all that, but there was a bridge single. There was a single that bridged both albums. And we need to speak about that before we speak about the second LP. And that single was Whatever. Now, I'm going to ask you the question straight off the bat here, because you and I don't analyse the music. We don't talk about the playing so much because we're not musicians. We talk from the fans' perspective, right? That single, Whatever, should that song, or which album would it have been better suited on? Definitely Maybe or Morning Glory?
Morning Glory, definitely. I think Definitely Maybe is a near perfect album. And I say a near perfect album because there's one track on it. It should be nowhere near an album that good.
Which track was it? Because you mentioned it in the first show, didn't you? The one track you would have removed from that LP.
The one about lasagna. Easy.
Diggsy's Dinner.
Diggsy's Dinner, aye. Was it not spelled Diggsy's Diner though at one point?
I think there are versions of the LP maybe not the UK version, Kev, but there are versions I've seen. I think it's a Japanese
Aye,
import.
I'm sure I've seen
Mm-hmm.
the Digsy's Diner on it.
Yep.
Aye, that shouldn't have been anywhere near that LP.
Why did he do it? Why did he do it? Noel, I'm talking about Noel. Why did he put it in there? Was it that quirkiness, the kind of the Beatles vibe, Octopus's Garden? Let's throw in a kind of a nursery rhymes style song.
It was a staple of their live set at that point as well. Mm-hmm. So they probably put it on there. I think there is a Beatles influence there. There is a wee quirky Beatles influence there. That goes if it's saying there's a Beatles influence, but no, I think whatever would sit on would actually improve What's the Story Morning Glory tenfold.
Right.
It would if it went there, aye.
It's a good opinion.
But again, this is a Manchester thing, ain't it? This is a thing that no always believing that or anybody from Manchester believing it's going to end. So everything was getting thrown out there, and instead of maybe taking a wee step back and thinking about things.
Kev, I'm going to talk to you about art versus business, because that leads us on to the B-side question. You're talking about things getting thrown out there. There are B-sides, as we know, that would have graced the albums or A-sides of many bands, Oasis included. What he would have done a few years later to get a couple of the B-sides as singles or album tracks. But before we actually get into the set list of this particular album, right, we'll look at the times, the state of the times, what, you know, the Britpop era, the Batley Britpop, Noel Gallagher going to 10 Downing Street, Blur versus Oasis, the whole shebang. Nebworth, should they have split up after it? Is that all right to say that with hindsight? Tony McCarroll leaves the band. Is that the first moment where you think to yourself, they've lost something, maybe no musically, but something in terms of the chemistry and the spirit of the band? Right, so you've said to me there, whatever would sit on Morning Glory. So let's look at the playlist, the set list rather. Tell me, where does it sit? Do you replace a song or do you add to the album? Where does it sit on that album?
Replace a song.
Okay.
Go and read the set list.
Right. We'll go through this in more detail, but it's Hello. Right. Starts off with Hello. Again, we'll give our opinions on this. I think it's a better live song than it is on the record. Roll with it. Big Celtic kind of connection here, so we'll talk about that. Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger. Hey Now, sometimes the kind of
whatever goes in.
It goes in instead of Hey Now. Right.
It goes in there, aye.
Right. Okay. We'll come back to that. So whatever makes it onto What's the Story Morning Glory, what do you think in the comment section? I remember reading an interview with Bobby Gillespie, and he spoke about the fact it was around about the Memphis tapes, Kev. You know, you and I love the Memphis tapes, the whole story around that, the struggle to follow up on Screamacelica. And he said, you know, sometimes the imperfections is what it is. You put it out, what it looks like, what it sounds like at that time. So you just don't change it. And I know that the first band I ever seen live, U2, have kind of done a bit of a retrospective recently. Songs of Surrender, where they've gone back and have changed things. And, you know, I remember them talking about Pop, the album Pop, and maybe redoing Pop because they weren't happy with the final production of it. But it's out there, and if it's out there, Kev, leave it as it is, move on, write a new song, write a new album, improve on it live maybe, but don't go back and try and recreate it. What's your thoughts?
No, I think there's been a couple of attempts at maybe stripping songs back and restructuring them and stuff like that. I know we're going to talk about Be Here Now Tomorrow Night, but Noel done it with Do You Know What I Mean, eh?
Yeah,
he stripped out everything and decided, nah, it's time, or either that he just couldn't be bothered doing the rest of the album because there was like...
He said that, actually. He did say that.
Because it's so overblown, even though I love that version of Do You Know What I Mean, eh? And I love the overblown version of Do I Know What I Mean as well. But I think I'm not going to compare myself to anybody that's got more artistic merit than me. But I understand where they're coming from, that you'll keep on going back to things. I understand where they're coming from. That sometimes if it's no out there, you'll just keep on going back and back and back, making changes, and I can understand why. I can also understand why these guys make a record, work out how to do it live, and never listen to it again.
Yeah,
because
100%.
It'll drive them mental at times.
Yeah, you're so immersed in whatever it is you're working on. I mean, I can only relate this to writing books, and my most recent book, and I've gone on about it, and you'll be bored hearing me talking about it. I've lost count how many drafts, Kev. I lost count of how many drafts of that book that I wrote, to the point where it took me 7 years. It should have taken me 2 or 3. And I probably would have still been going over it right now had the publisher not said, give me the manuscript, we're releasing it. And I'm pretty sure there's loads of bands getting into that situation, in that predicament. Second Coming by the Stone Roses, were they ever going to finish it? Unless, I think Geffen eventually employed somebody to just go and get the record sorted and get it out there, because, you know, it's like they would never get it finished. I mean, Oasis themselves recorded or mastered definitely maybe 3 times before it was ready. So I can see why there is that here, like the here and now moment of getting a record out there. You already said you would put whatever on the record. It was released on the 2nd of October 1995, Kev. And at that time, because we're going to be jumping back and forward between the album and where we were in society and as a movement, and where Celtic were also.
The 2nd of October?
2nd of October. 1995.
I thought that was released in December. I thought that was a Christmas sort of single.
The album, the LP.
Oh, the LP. All right, aye.
So
sorry.
the LP was whatever was a kind of Christmassy. Definitely, that was a Christmassy single. No doubt about it. That came out, and there was kind of murmurings at the time that it might be a Christmas number 1 in 1994. Didn't quite happen. At this time,
Stay Now.
Stay Now. Oh, was that number 1? Stay Another Day.
He's 17. Stay Another Day. Aye.
Oh dear. Right, the Celtic connection there. The Celtic connection with East 17 is Jinky Gilmer. Now, the song that you can see on the ticker tape at the bottom of the screen, The Glory in the Dream, was co-written by J.J. Gilmer, formerly of the Silencers, and he eventually replaced Brian Harvey in East 17. There you go. There's the link. Right. So the album, October 95, Kev, in relation to where you were as a Celtic fan and, you know, going to the games, what bus were you going on? What was the period in your life? Was that, what age were you? 95? I was 16, 17.
1920, I would have been.
Right. Okay. Were you mad for it? We can use that term on this particular show. Were you mad for it at that point?
Aye, definitely. More ways than one. Definitely music-wise and football-wise, I was completely and utterly immersed in both cultures of both. At that point, musically, everything was gone mainstream. Everything was coming out. Everything was great. Looking back on it, no, everything was great, but at the time before, everything was great. And you had these guys for a working class background in Manchester who were becoming the biggest band in the world. And there was a band I had followed since 94, since I'd seen them in the Cat House in Glasgow. And I walked out the Cat House that night, and I've told this before. And when I got back to the local pub that I used to drink in then, I says, they're going to be the biggest band in Britain. We just knew when the volume of that gig that night was unbelievable. And for that point, I was completely mad for it, as you actually say. At the Celtic point, at that point, I was going up on the Gallagher's Bar bus from the Ratlock at that point, because I was a trainee auctioneer at Kildeen Market. So Kildeen Market was just about 200 yards from Gallagher's Bar. And so I used to go in the Bannockburn Celtic Supporters Club. Then when I got that job, there was no way I was making midweek games, so I swapped buses just out of necessity, really. And at that point, we just won the Scottish Cup. October 95, when did we play PSG?
Right. Well, that's a great question, because that feeds into the album brilliantly with regards to Roll With It. I've got the fixes up here. I do know that the first game we played after the album was released was Jackie McNamara's debut against Falkirk. Kev, we played PSG the same month. It was the 19th. We went away. I remember I wasn't at the game away from home. I was in the Netherlands when we got beat 1-0. And I remember the Pierre Van Hooijdonk miss, where he blamed the floodlights for being in his eyes. And then the return game, Kev, was on the 2nd of November. So we were in the Parc des Princes on the 19th of October, the same month that album came out. So, yeah, we'll get into the relevance of Roll With It. But Jackie McNamara, isn't it interesting that his debut was the first game Celtic played after Morning Glory came out, because him and Sid were kind of really of the moment. They had that whole baggy thing going on, even the jerseys. There's a picture of Jackie when he signs for Celtic, and he's got this jersey that's about 8 sizes too big for him. It's huge. But, the styles on the pitch were the same as the ones on the terrace, and everything was baggy at that point, Kev.
It was. When you look back now, especially if you look at the Oasis book, Supersonic, some of their dress sense was utterly terrible.
That was shocking.
It was almost anti-fashion at that point. It was you see it now, like maybe later period Oasis, and when you had like a sort of mod revival, and you've got the Pretty Green stuff and Ben Sherman stuff and all these elite fashion labels started mimicking a 1960s mod style, slimmed everything down in that. That wasn't the style back in 95. It was baggy clothes. You were still coming at that rave era where everybody wore baggy clothes in the Manchester rave era, and folks still had baggy jeans because you weren't going to actually buy another pair of jeans just because money wise. So you had baggy jeans on, you maybe just put a Fred Perry on rather than a Acid House t-shirt or something like that. So I think it was a bit of a mixture of the two. There, not a lot of money kicking about. Also at the time as well, you've got a kind of feel-good factor, and we can't deny it with Tony Blair and all that. You cannot deny that.
Cool Britannia.
Aye, but that's what killed Britpop, really. And I could talk about that like for ages, And as you say, Jackie and Sid had the curtains, the baggy tops, and it's just quite funny seeing that at that point, because it was very unusual in Scottish football to get two young laddies who looked like that, who made it quite known that they were into independent music and not going up to China Whites on a Saturday night to dance to disco tunes.
They related to us, Kev. We Sid was a big pals with Paul Quinn at Teenage Fan Club. He listened to the Roses, Oasis, all the bands of the moment. They could have quite easily been sitting on the supporters bus with you, but they were actually on the park. They looked like they could have just been a punter like you and I. I was a wee bit younger, but yeah, I do remember Ben Sherman having a kind of resurgence in popularity, but there was still quite a bit of Lacoste kicking about at that point. Kev, polo shirts, Fila, obviously with the girls and boys video game and albums wearing that.
Tracky tops became popular.
Tracky tops, and the actual tracky top he was wearing was like a Terry Towlin material. It wasn't a tracksuit material, and they became big. Kappa, before Little Britain turned it into a different brand altogether. Kappa was quite a cool, hard to find brand. You couldn't really get it. It was pretty hard to get, and some of the other brands that came in, people were bouncing about. Quite a lot of folk were bouncing about with the old Reebok Classics. Yes, they did have a Union Jack on them. They wouldn't be on my feet now, but people were wearing them. And that was the kind of fashions at the time. And, we spoke about it in the first album show, Kev, where people's attitudes changed because they were almost mimicking the way that the Mancunians were talking and walking. People, I heard people in Fife calling their wee brothers our kid. And you kind of thought, all right, so there has been a complete movement here. It's not just the music, the minute people start dressing and acting like the bands that they're watching, that it's a movement. It's not just a couple of bands releasing a few decent records, Kev.
It's kind of sad really.
I know.
But we all done it. We can't deny that we all done it. And at least I didn't have the talent to actually go into a band and like think I could mimic. Like
You were in a band though. You were in a band, right?
No.
Are you sure? I remember you in the toll booth picking up a guitar and.
I ken a couple of chords, but I'm no.
But you weren't in a band.
I have got no musical talent whatsoever, as Andrew Rafferty will tell you since I'm working on him on the Henrik project.
Oh, which reminds me, I've still to send you your files. Sorry, mate.
Andrew Rafferty will tell you I have got no musical talent whatsoever.
But you have a passion for music, which is obviously the first thing you need. Here's a wee quote from Andy Bell. Andy Bell obviously was with Ride, another Creation band, and we are going to be talking about the Creation Records founder Alan McGee, because I'll be on stage with him in Glasgow on Friday. It's 30 years next month. Where are we? We're March. No, 30 years in May since Oasis were, in inverted commas, a discussion for another day discovered in Glasgow. And obviously I'm bringing Alan McGee back to Glasgow to talk all about that. And one of his other bands were Ride at the time. I know you're a big fan. Andy Bell, who later joined Oasis. There's an interesting wee quote here. The day that Definitely Maybe came out, I was with the band at the Hacienda. I was talking to Noel about music, and then I was saying, your album's great. And he said, well, I've already written the next one and the one after that. So at that time, this is Noel Gallagher at his most prolific. And he did have a master plan. We're going to be talking about that as a kind of B-side, and the fact that she probably should have been on the album. But he did have this master plan, Kev, and it was kind of mapped out almost like first 3 albums. He knew he had all the songs for virtually 3 albums all around the world, which ended up on album number 3. There's rehearsal footage of them in the Boardwalk in Manchester in 1993 playing that song. So it was maybe a case of just putting them on the right album and having the right fit.
Even in the early interviews, he was talking about, he says he had that song all around the world, but they had to wait till they had more money to actually do it justice, to actually record it the way it was sounding. So he was boasting about that quite early doors. Yeah, that you had that song, and it's quite interesting that he obviously, I think every band, when they go to their first album, especially, I mean, they weren't an overnight success, even though folk think they were an overnight success. They done the, I didn't like calling it the toilet circuit, but they busted a gut for at least a good 2 years before anything actually happened for them. And during that period, they've got a fantastic live set and Noel's in the background writing. So he's going into that with a stock of songs. And if you read all the books, which me and you have both done in that, seem to be what the other ones were doing in the pub, Noel seemed to just be sitting in the studio just struggling away and doing what he was doing. And if things are going well for you, and you can write an album in 2 weeks. But in 25 years' time, sometimes it shows it was written in 2 weeks.
Well, this is the thing about lyrics, because when we did the first show, there was a couple of kind of like quick fire questions near the end, and we are going to ask them at the end of the pod. And it was things like, right, we'll have a chat about the B-sides, drop 2 album tracks for 2 of the B-sides. What's the best lyric? Should they have quit after Nebworth? You read the lyrics to this album and they're no great. And I think Noel's already accepted that. And he says that if there was anything that he criticises about this particular LP, it was the lyrics, because he just thought they were kind of half-arsed, half-baked. But he ran with it because the album was coming out and the songs were strong, but the lyrics weren't great.
Have you seen that YouTube guy that breaks down all the Oasis albums when he spoke about what's the story of Morning Glory? And he reckons it's a story. He reckons it's it's got a story arc, and it starts at the infamous Whiskey A Go-Go gig.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole album's about the lassie Noel went away to San Francisco.
I heard something about that. That he wrote Talk Tonight. He wrote Talk Tonight about the girl. Is that right?
Yes. Right. But he reckons he's timelined it, and he reckons that every song is about that 6-month period. Like, it's right conspiracy theory nonsense, man, but it's like... He basically thinks it's a concept album,
A concept album.
He had it as a concept album. He had it out there as Quadrophenia story.
No, that's fair enough. And by the way, if you look into something long and hard enough, you do enough research into it, I think you can come up with threads and concepts. I think you can. So fair play to the guy for having the commitment to do that, because I know he's a massive Oasis fan. But I remember talking about the Definitely Maybe lyrics, and it was the one where, what was it now? Up in the sky, hey, you up in the sky, learning to fly, tell me how high, right? Do you think you go before you start falling? And you were convinced that was a political statement. And I was kind of saying to you, wait a minute, it's a drug song. It's about drugs. So you were convinced it was a political song. I was thinking that's about cocaine. And you can basically read into a song any way you want to read into it. That's the kind of point I'm trying to make. And I think that when you look deep enough into an album, if you put enough work into it, you could probably come up. Fair play if he's managed to join a few dots, even if it's not right, and he's came up with a story about it. But I do like at this time looking at what the band, the makeup of the band, right? And I've pulled a wee quote from an article I was reading in one of the music mags from the period, Kev, which back then was superb. The music magazines back then, the weeklies and the monthlies, they were brilliant. And it says that in terms of the band dynamic, Liam and Gwigsy shared a room in the kind of early days, and I mean 94, 95 early days, no, the very, very early days, because they probably wouldn't have been staying overnight when they were gigging. Tony McCarroll was a quiet bloke. I'll come back to that. Gwigsy was very laconic. I think, you know, that speaks for himself. Quite a man of few words who just like to have a smoke. Bonehead was always a madman, keeping everyone's spirits up. He was a clown prince of Oasis. But interestingly, Tony McCarroll was a quiet bloke. And there's a couple of books that really home in on the relationship that the band had with Tony. The reason I'm bringing that up is because obviously this was his last appearance, some might say, #1 single, and it appeared on this album. But he was sacked. He was sacked, and I don't know if you've read it. Is it Ian Robertson, the guy that used to be a bouncer for Liam? Big Scottish guy. And he speaks about the way that he was actually treated in the band, and when you're reading it, it doesn't read very well, does it?
It doesn't read well, but like a lot of things at that time, a lot of it doesn't read well now when you actually go back to it. A lot of the behaviours didn't read well, a lot of the things that were said at that time didn't read well. You always had Noel saying, I mean, right from the start, the drummer's rubbish. The drummer's rubbish. He's not going to play on any of the newer songs because he couldn't actually keep time. Then you have the whole myth about Bring It On Down, that they basically slagged him into doing it because he couldn't get it right, and they were bringing in a session drummer to get it done. His drumming's rudimentary. It is functional. But at that point, I think they were on too much of a crest of a wave that losing your drummer was not a big thing for them. Like, you still had four remaining members there at that point, and replacing them with a drummer. Replacing the drummer wasn't such a big deal to them, because I think they could have, as they tried about 6 years later, they tried to replace all of the band apart from the two brothers. And they still carried on. So at that point, they were getting away with anything. But I can understand from a musical point of view why they done it. But the books, some of his treatment was absolutely horrendous. I've read Tony McCarroll's book as well. And if it's true, because everybody's memories are different. I mean, everybody's memories, you see things that you want to see. And everybody will be three sides to that, to the stories that he's told in his book. But it is interesting that I think Liam says that he's been talking to him.
To Tony?
To Tony, aye.
Right.
So
I bumped into him. I told you that. A very, very matter of chance, like complete chance meeting with Tony McCarroll. And we were chatting away, and, you know, he never said a bad word about Noel Gallagher. And he probably could have done, but he didn't. And I think what I found interesting, because like you say, I've read everything there is to read about the band, and I look at there's an interview with Owen Morris, and he believed that Tony was competent enough as a drummer. And I always remember, was it Noel Owen Morris that the Bring It On Down thing, they were waiting on the session drummer coming in, and Noel was away for lunch. So he says to Tony, you can do this, get in that booth and do it. So Tony got what he had to get, and he nailed it. Owen Morris contacted the session drummer and cancelled him. Noel then comes back for the second session of the day. The drums have been laid down. no says either good enough, brilliant, superb, thinking it was a session drummer, but it was Tony that did it. So there was a whole thing going on where I don't think it mattered at that point if he was going to be good enough. They'd made a decision that he was away. Obviously, what then happens is Paul Weller's drummer's brother is then drafted in, Alan White. Steve White had played with Paul Weller for years and continued to play with him for years after this particular period. But the reason I'm bringing it up is there was a certain kind of spirit with the band when Gwigsy and Tony and Bonehead were in it. And this was the beginning of that kind of being lost. I think, yes, musically they were better, Kev. And I think now that Tony's left and Alan comes in, that is now the ultimate. This is the quintessential Oasis lineup. Would you agree? Because I'm going to get onto the point of whether or not they should reform. This is the best lineup, if you ask me. What do you think?
I'm trying to think. Well, I saw them with McCarroll in the Cat House. When did they sack McCarroll?
Well, he played on... The strange thing is, he played on Some Might Say, so he's on this album.
Right, so when I saw them at the Barrowlands at 94, would have been McCarroll and
it would have been Tony McCarroll. Interestingly, Kev, they played Some Might Say twice on Top of the Pops. The first time they played them, Tony's on the drums. The second time they played Top of the Pops, Alan White's on the drums. So just after the release of that single was when they sacked him.
I think the best two times that I saw them were the first two times when Tony McCarroll was on drums.
Right.
It could have just been the time. It could have just been them as a live band. It could have just been a number of things. But the best two times I saw them was the first time on that Barrowlands gig, and Tony McCarroll was on the drums.
Yeah.
And I remember outside that Cat House gig, if we go back to it, them walking down the street past the queue, and they looked like a band. Aye, they looked like a band. They looked like a gang.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I remember that happened to me with Doves. Doves just walking into the venue through the front door, and the bouncer actually stopped Jimmy Goodwin for getting in. And he was like, "Come with the band." No, you're not getting in, pal. No, that's really interesting. Who were you at the gig with?
I was going to see Doves at the Barra once, and I was in Baird's having a pint, and Jimmy Goodwin was sitting next to me.
Yeah. Well, one of the great lost interviews that I've done, as well as the Chris Sutton one that you lost. There's a wee story around that, Kev, but obviously you and I were at the Chris Sutton and Neil Lennon gig that we'd done years ago. Lenny was still the manager of Hibs, and the Neil Lennon interview is on the channel, but it was like pre-live stream, so it's just audio only. It's on the channel, check it out. Interesting interview with Neil Lennon. But obviously we also interviewed Chris Sutton, and Kevin didn't press record. Is that the myth? Is that like getting discovered?
That's the myth.
Is that the legend? That's a legend, right?
That's a legend, aye.
But I also, I've got a lost interview which is sitting on one of my desktops, one of my laptops rather, sorry. And it's with the proprietor of the Beards Bar, who gets called Cads. And I interviewed him. And he told some incredible tales of what went on at the Beards prior to big bands going on the stage, and who came in and who wasn't allowed in, and we never ever put it out. That's all I'm saying. We never ever put that one out. Jungle Lion, I'm sorry, I know this wasn't really announced until we put a wee post out on the socials. But Kevin and I will be here tonight and tomorrow. We'll be talking Celtic and Oasis, because I'm going to be live on stage with Alan McGee. And not just because of that, we started this series how long ago? 2 years ago? A year and a half? Something like that? A year and a half ago. And just time and everything else that has caught up with us. Daz Jacket, what's the story? Stop the Tories. That's not easy to say, but I'll keep saying it. Absolutely. And John, great to see you live. You've been trying to get the live comments up, but you've just been missing us at 12:30, and you're on and you're watching us live. And we're here, and it's me and Kevin Graham. And yeah, we were a wee bit late because, it's night time and there's kids and all that kind of stuff to deal with, Kev, isn't it? We've also got GP 1888. The Master Plan is a great song. We are going to be talking about the B-side situation. I'm mad for this. Absolutely, Paul. Tell us your favourite Oasis moments from that era, and also your favourite Celtic moments, because we'll be tapping into what was going on at Celtic, and that's exactly what we're going to do right now, Kevin Graham. At this time, this was the season post-Hampden. There was obviously 2 cup finals in the previous season. We were quite a bit short, I think, but we managed to get the Scottish Cup under our belt, virtue of a 1-0 win over Adrionians, 9th minute header by Pierre Van Hooijdonk. Great cross by Tosh McKinley. I've got it in my mind's eye. And I always say that game is in my top 3 Celtic games, not because it was a good game, just the importance of it. We come back to Celtic Park the following season. You and I got our first season tickets in 94-95 for Hampden, and we come back to Celtic Park, and it's a bit of a new look Celtic, where there was a real good feeling about Tommy Burns, the style that he was playing, and the team that he was building. So I predicted this season, and I had a bet that Van Hooijdonk would score 30 goals this campaign, and he did. And I remember watching the game against Aberdeen. You remember early in the season, first game of the season up at Pittodrie. First league game. I was going to say the first league game, but I'm just looking now. We actually played Wraith Rovers before that. It's funny how your mind plays tricks on you, but we went up to Pittodrie. It was raining, and we beat them 3-2. And it was one of the games, Kev, that I think I was probably looking at the previous season and saying, well, we'd have drawn that game, or even worse still, we'd have got beaten in a game like this. But now, the team that we started with up at Pittodrie was Marshall, Vata, Boyd, McKinley, O'Donnell, Collins, Grant, Donnelly, Van Hooijdonk, and Tom. The subs were Mackay, Andy Walker, Brian McLaughlin, and the goals came 2 for John Collins and 1 from Tom. Remember Andy Tom's goal?
Yes.
It was incredible. It was 3-2 at half-time, this game, Kev. But it did give you a sense that this season was going to be slightly different. I think that game, there was a sign of things to come.
It was a sign of things to come, and it was an exciting team, even though when you read out the goalie and the defence, you're like, well, how did that manage to excite us such? But then you've got John Collins. I think John Collins is much maligned as a Celtic player, much forgotten as how good a Celtic player he actually was.
I'd love to get him on the stage, Kev. I'd love to get him in on a live event.
Because of the way that he left, and also he was back there with Ronnie, and he seems to be a character that divides opinion.
He does.
I don't know why. He's one of the best midfielders I've ever seen play for Celtic. And what you've got to remember is over the years, we had Paul McStay, John Collins in the middle of the park.
I know. And by the way, don't forget Phil O'Donnell. Because
Phil
Tommy brought in Phil to supplement that as well. What a midfield. With Peter Grant doing a lot of the kind of the dirty work, as it were. But there's your 4 midfielders, Kev. Superb midfield.
And you had Tom, whose pace electric, and Van Hooijdonk, who knew where the goals were as well. It was a time where it felt like we had arrived in the 90s. Whereas before that we were just playing about. And when Burns came back, we moved to Celtic Park. Everything felt big and new. Everything felt great. The music, the soundtrack was fantastic.
Yeah.
The Tories were going to go out. We were going back to Celtic Park. Tommy was the manager. We had Van Hooijdonk, who was a new hero. We had this German international who was as fast as a torpedo. You had John Collins. You had signed Phil O'Donnell. You had a smart kit. Everything was great, even for Gordon Marshall was in goals. And because you actually wanted to go and see that team. I think everything at that point was just a perfect storm. It was a real perfect storm. Especially in my mind, thinking back, and I was 19, 20 at that point as well.
Hedonistic times. Yeah, it was. The music. You're kind of leaving school, you're starting your kind of working life, you've got money in your pocket for the first time, Kev, and all that feeds into the memories that you've got as a Celtic fan at the time. We went 2-0 down in that game within 10 minutes. Tom Boyd scores an own goal and Ian Jess scored to put Aberdeen 2-0 up. And we fought back.
Jess was a player. Jess was definitely a player, man.
I like Jess and Booth, actually, from that team. I thought both of them would have done a job for Celtic. But then he goes down to Coventry under Gordon Strachan, Ian Jess, and didn't really work out for him down there. He ends up playing for Bradford, coming back up to Aberdeen. But I think it was Colin Watt that brought this up, Kev, so I'm going to give Colin credit for it. If it was somebody else, I apologise. Somebody mentioned on Acsom, because it's always been my firm belief, not because I know a lot about football, because looking back, it's quite clear that your midfield and your top line is far superior to what you've got at the back. And by the way, I was a big fan of Tosh McKinley. I was a big fan of Tommy Boyd. And I think that when you look at that particular side and how we were lining up, we definitely lacked at the back, and in particular in goals. And I think that had we, signed or brought through a really quality goalkeeper under Tommy Burns, we'd have won the league, no doubt about it. That for me was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, reasons we never won the league, as well as Jim Farry with the registration and everything else. But you look at that particular team, Gordon Marshall's in goals, right? Now, we've interviewed Gordon Marshall on A Celtic State of Mind, that's also on the channel. And I think it was Colin. Colin mentioned, had we simply kept Shay Given at the club, and he wanted to stay at the club, Kev, right? Had we kept Shay Given at the club at this moment in time, Shay Given's already made his debut for Blackburn Rovers the previous season. He's now 19 years of age. And you think to yourself, yeah, he's got a lot of development to come. But if we had a decent goalie under Tommy Burns, history would have been completely different, in my opinion. And I know that he then started bringing in players. Stubbsy comes in, John Hughes comes in. But I mean, you look at the sub, Malky Mackay, we bought him for 90 grand from Queen's Park. We had a really thin squad at that point.
Even bringing in John Hughes later on was
stopgap.
I love Big Stubbsy. I mean, he brings in Jackie Mack, and after that Aberdeen game a couple of weeks later, I mean, folk under 40 will be wondering, what do you mean you could sign players in October? We could sign players in October. He brings in Jackie Mack, that improves that defence right away.
So did Tosh the previous season.
Tosh was a fantastic fullback. Tosh is probably an underrated fullback. But the two centre halves probably let you down until Stubbsy arrives, and he was probably unlucky. But as you say, the goalkeeper's always it's always a puzzle. It's a puzzle that was never solved. Why
did Tommy sign a goalkeeper? Did he actually sign a keeper? Because he inherited Pat Bonner and he inherited Gordon Marshall. Pat Bonner played in the cup final that you mentioned against Airdrie. He had been freed, as had Charlie Nicholas in the previous pre-season, 94. Pat Bonner goes to the USA World Cup 1994 as the only player in the tournament without a club. His name came up on the screen and there was no club. There was talk that he was going to Kilmarnock. We then take the Kilmarnock manager, and then Burns wants to keep Celtic. Charlie and Pat Bonner. But I don't think, please tell me in the comment section, because we had Pat Bonner, Gordon Marshall, Stuart Kerr under Tommy. And there was one game I remember where we had to bring on a sub goalie. Now, was the sub goalie Barry John Corr or Andy Madonicky? We had to bring a young goalie. I can't remember him buying a goalie, Kev.
No, I can't. Now that you've mentioned that, I can't remember it either. But there is a famous picture, where you've got the three goalkeepers you mentioned there. Well, there'll be two of them. I don't know what age Kerr would have been there, but it's got Shay Given and Brad Fiedel in the picture as well.
That's
right. Were at Celtic Park at the exact same time.
Yeah.
And
we kept Big Gordon.
That's because he was cutting the hair in the dressing room.
Well, there is that, yes. Big Holmesy, as he was called by Peter Grant. Ask why.
I'll make this confession. I liked Marshall when he was with Falkirk. I did, and I wasn't that. When we signed him, I went, that's an upgrade on Pat Bonner. I really did say that.
Marshall?
Really did say that.
He used to wear like a polo neck underneath his goalie top at Falkirk, or a snood or something, and obviously he came to Celtic. His dad had played in goals for Celtic, so there was all that going on. And then his brother came. Remember, his brother signed with us as well, Scott Marshall.
Scott for Arsenal.
Yeah, Yeah, interesting. I think, was it Joe Vengos that signed him? There we go. We digress. Paul Cook reunion. Is it on? Yes or no, guys? Right. So we're diving back into the world Oasis. It's 1995. The band have released what would become their biggest album of all time. It went on to sell 22 million copies worldwide. And I think over the years bought several. This is an album I bought several copies of, Kev, because it kept going missing, and you would leave it when you went round to your mate's house and at a party because you had to take tunes for the CD player and all that kind of stuff. So I have had several copies of it, but the one that I've got just now, and I'll be asking Alan McGee to sign it on Friday night, is already signed by Bonehead. You remember that interview, which is on the channel. Check it out, subscribe. And Brian Cannon, who designed all the 1990s Oasis record sleeves as well. Now I'm looking at the relationship that Oasis had, not only with the fans, with fashion, with the politics of its time, but this was the era, if you think back, Britpop, right? But this new Labour thing, like you say, Cool Britannia, Tony Blair, we were just so delighted to get rid of the Tories, Kev, right? That you were looking for a leader, you were looking for somebody to come along in the Labour Party. And at that time, yes, we know that what he went on to do in terms of the Iraq War and everything that was connected to that, because obviously he's got away scot-free with that, Kev. He was in the pocket of the Americans and basically doing what he was told.
Definitely.
But at that time, completely different vibe.
I mean, this was 2 years before he got into power. 2 years before he got into power, and we were already seeing him as a prime minister because we knew at that point that the Tories were old, tired, grey. John Major was there, and we had this young guy who played in a band in the 70s, had long hair,
smoked marijuana,
played football. He didn't really do all of that. You had Alistair Campbell, who basically was the brains behind it and done a lot of the in the thick of it stuff, shall we say.
And he can play the Fields Athenry and the bagpipes.
And he can play the Fields Athenry and the bagpipes as well. But if you look back at, I'll probably get shot down for this, but being political, but if you go back and look at Labour's manifesto in 1997, it was really, really radical. And it was really, even though the Tories claim that Margaret Thatcher's greatest legacy was Tony Blair, when you actually have a look at the Tory Party the Labour Party manifesto in 97, it's not as Jeremy Corbyn radical, but it was a complete sea change for what we'd had for decades before.
McGee got involved,
and he gave us the Scottish Parliament as well. They gave us devolution. So
you're looking at radicalisation in a different way. Like, there was a focus, for example, Kev, on changing legislation to allow musicians the opportunity to get paid a wee bit more for being a musician. And there was like all these buzz groups, I don't know what you call them, but these think tanks, and Alan McGee was part of that. He fed in his career and his life and how it benefited him. And obviously the legislation was passed. So that was one of the things that was pretty radical. But also at that time, remember there was a whole ladette thing going on with Loaded and all that started happening, FHM, GQ. And you used to watch things that, at that time develop. If you were to watch them now, Kev, I mean, even some of the old Soccer AM stuff you watch now, you think it simply wouldn't be televised. But there was a ladette culture, wasn't there?
It's interesting that Soccer AM was cancelled today. Sky, it's got 10 episodes left, and Sky are taking it off air. That was announced today.
I didn't see that.
That was announced today. There was a lot of stuff, and we all took part in it. But then when we look back at it, you're like, Jesus, it was a very wild and liberating time, where I think a lot of girls that maybe I can't talk for girls. I was a lad. I was a guy. I was well into it. But when you look back at the whole Loaded culture and the whole FHM culture and all of that, it was off its time. It was off that time. It was just after the greyness of the Tories. The media were just trying to say, well, what can we get away with now? And they just took it and run with it. And when you had some great copy like guys like Weller, Noel, Alburn and all that at that point, who were coming out and saying quite radical, quite outrageous things, it went like that. I mean, there's quotes for Liam when he's gone like that. I like. There's a load of quotes round about that time that 3 years before Sean Ryder got pilloried for in the music press.
Absolutely.
And 3 years later, they were deemed as acceptable.
You're right.
When you look back on it now, and it was just that sort of change. And I hate folk putting today's morals on their moral compass on. We're 25 years down the line. It was a different time. Aye, it was maybe all right then, but when you look back on it now, from today's point of view, you go, aye, that was a bit wrong. But go back and watch Quadrophenia. Listen to the language in Quadrophenia. And one of the interesting programmes about Quadrophenia was the original cast on a read-through on a stage.
Right.
And they were cringing at some of the dialogue.
Yeah.
They were cringing at it.
Aye. I remember not that long ago watching or rewatching Restless Natives and thinking exactly the same. But thinking exactly the same, Kev. There's loads more to talk about. We're going to have a wee chat through the track list and then some thoughts about what could have been better even than the 22 million selling album. We'll also be talking about Celtic, our relationship with Roll With It, how that happened and how the season finished off for Celtic. But before we do that, Kevin has sidestepped the actual question that Paul was asking very skillfully. Did you notice how he did that? People look at reunions. I remember wanting and dying for Stone Roses to reform because I didn't see them first time round, Kev. So selfishly, I wanted them to reform and I wanted to see them. Oasis, I seen them as many times as I wanted to see them when they were at their height and when their star had kind of like dimmed a wee bit and all that kind of stuff. They've gone on, both of them, to have successful solo careers. Liam is selling a lot more records and he's selling out bigger venues. And he's always pushed for the reformation of the band. But what would it look like, Kev? And I mean, people think, it'd be great because they're thinking about these times. They're thinking about the heady, hedonistic times of the 90s in Nebworth and that particular lineup, which I think is the best lineup. They're not thinking about the final album number 7 in the lineup and the gigs that we're doing then. They're thinking of the best version of Oasis. But it's not the best version of Oasis we would get, is it?
That's the problem. That is the absolute problem of what they call a reunion. It's for 2000 onwards, it's basically a circus. It's two brothers and a load of session musicians. Yeah. That's what Oasis were. And it was an absolute pantomime circus. But we all paid into it and we still all went to see them. And that 10 years of noise and confusion was on the telly the other week there, the gig that they had at the Barrowlands that I was at. And I fell asleep on the way on the train home and woke up.
Is that the one that was on live?
Sky.
Yeah.
It was shown on MTV, And basically that's just Liam and Noel and Alan White and Gem and Andy Bell, It
became like a creation house band.
Aye, and that's the problem with the Rosies still had something to prove. They had something to prove when they came back,
and money to make as well, because they never,
Aye, and money to make, because they got their payday quite rightly. I don't think Oasis have got anything to prove. I think Liam's doing well enough with his Oasis solo career. So I can't, because the main reason that they will get back together, but it'll just be Liam and Noel. Gwigsy's not going to be interested because he's too busy in London looking like a geography teacher. Bonehead would be there because he can...
the relationship with Liam. Yeah.
The relationship with Liam. Drummer, the boy Alan White doesn't talk to any of them anymore.
No.
Seemingly that's gone. The boy Shattuck was Zach Starkey, was a fantastic drummer as well. So you'll end up with a mismatch of the two solo bands that they've got now. It'll be like picking a 5-a-side team with the two solo bands.
Well, BDI was the last lineup other than No. And I know that you love BDI, so that's another
BDI,
that's another show. That's another show. We need to run through the actual album as well. Alan Woods remembers that he was working and living in Australia when this came out. It just hit every single country like a juggernaut. Scott, how this was the first cassette I ever bought. Game changer, got me into music. I remember buying Definitely Maybe on cassette. I used to listen to it doing my paper round, and obviously later on managed to get it on CD. And Daz Jake, The Money Must Be Right, if it's even up for discussion. Well, we know that a divorce can change people's view on whether or not they should reform the band and make a few quid. Alan played this on his Walkman on the train to work every morning. That was a King Day album, the King Day era. Riddick has missed Screamacelica. So's Kevin and I. We've missed it as well, Kev. We've done a few studio versions, which were brilliant, can I just say, with Kevin Miles, David Ross, and your man, Johnny Proctor. Nice crossover, looking at different teams. That was brilliant, by the way, I've got to say. Studio Ones, if you want to watch them. Alan Wood, you mentioned Cast No Shadow. Let's talk about some of the songs. Right. Let's start with Hello. I'm going to let you loose. Right, so it opens up with Hello. And I've always felt that I wouldn't ditch it for the album, Kev. I wouldn't ditch it from the album. But in light of what happened with regards to the Gary Glitter, the expose and jailing of Gary Glitter for some of the most heinous crimes any human being could commit, I thought at that point, ditch the Gary Glitter bit. Ditch it. I mean, he's got a songwriting credit on this song, Kev. You can't change what's on the album, like we spoke about at the top of the show. But live, I wish they'd ditched the Gary Glitter bit. I don't think it added to the song, and I wouldn't want associated with that individual.
No, but again, that's hindsight when we're looking back at it. I think it was just, it's a horrible song. It's a terrible song. Full stop.
Do you think it's better live though? I don't like the studio version. I don't like the album version, but I think it works live.
I mean, he had to give Gary Glitter, or whoever wrote the song for Gary Glitter, the writing credit. Then there was also meant to be Step Out on it, which
that's right.
He was having to give Stevie Wonder a writing credit on it as well. Just laziness.
No wonder.
It's just absolute laziness to add that onto the end of the song. It's like whatever, all the young dudes, but towards the end of it.
Which they then dropped,
They then dropped.
Yep.
It was Sonny was doing at that point. He was like, he was doing this. I think it's a terrible start to an album. I really did. I just
did you think that at the time, or were you just caught up on it? Aye.
No. It's again,
I can't remember anybody criticising this at the time.
Again, perfect storm at the time, But when you go back now, and again, we shouldn't really go back, and I loved the album at the time and that, but when I look back now, and even when I see Oasis, peak Oasis is 4 albums because I count the Master Plan as an album. And when you see what he was doing, he got away with it, I think. Nobody questioned Hello because of the quality of the B-sides that were coming out at the exact same time.
True. And we're going to get onto that and the Master Plan album, because there should have been at least 4 proper studio albums released by Oasis in the 90s, not including the Master Plan. Obviously, we came out as a compilation album. Right, so Hello, we're no massive fans of it, is what we're saying. So that's a good start for one of the biggest albums in UK musical history. Uncle and Nobby Steamboat, my favourite Oasis song is Rocking Chair. We will get to that, because that is one of the incredible B-sides that came out around about this time. And by the way, this was Noel's B-side Purple Patch. This was the best B-sides off this album, no doubt about it. GP, I'm bringing this up because you say, who likes Liam more than Noel? And I can understand why people would, but I'll tell you the angle I would take on this, Kev. If I was given the opportunity to interview, because that's one of the things I love doing, Liam or Noel, I would interview Noel. But I can understand why people think that Liam is a geezer and, a man of the people and all that kind of stuff. But I find Noel a more interesting character. What's your take on it?
I can see why. I think sometimes, and I think Liam would be a riot. I think it would be a good laugh, but I think you would have a laugh with Noel as well. You would. I probably agree with you. If the old dinner party, who would you invite to a dinner party? It would be Noel, wouldn't it be Liam?
No, because Liam would try it on with your missus and probably kick off and get steaming and all that kind of stuff, Kev. So it would definitely be no. I said a purple patch. This is a wee interesting thing about Roll With It, right? Because, by the way, this isn't a great start to the album. Hello, then Roll With It, Kev.
No, it's
On
not.
reflection. Now, I
When,
know
when
that...
you, when you look at the Battle of Britpop, mate,
I know.
Country House and Roll With It are terrible, terrible songs.
They were the two worst songs from Blood and Oasis, respectively, at that time, bizarrely enough. But again, I remember, I'm trying to remember, it was a stadium gig. I think it was Murrayfield. And I'm watching Oasis at Murrayfield, and they played Roll With It, and I kind of rolled my eyes and thought to myself, I just don't like the song. And the sound of that song, the energy of the crowd, I enjoyed it live. It's on record that I'm not a big fan of it. So this particular song, I find this really interesting, Kev, right? So you'll remember when Oasis were touring the UK and they'd done the Virgin Megastore in-store gig in Evan Dando, rather. Ends up on stage with him and is basically a professional Oasis hanger-on at this stage. And he sings backing vocals at the Virgin Megastore appearance and all this kind of stuff. So Evan Dando claimed that, in one of these occasions where they've all ended up back at the hotel, that him and Noel Gallagher have started jamming and they've written a song, and the song was called Purple Parallelogram. Have you heard it?
I've never heard the song.
You never heard it, right?
But I've heard the story.
Right. So anybody who's into Oasis who's maybe not heard this, check it out. It's on YouTube. The song was eventually recorded by the Lemonheads, but Noel was unhappy that he had gone and done it because he did not give him permission to go and record the song. Therefore, he did a Stevie Wonder on Evan Dando, and he said to him that he couldn't release it on the Lemonheads LP, which was called Car Button Cloth. But Noel later reworked the song and it became Roll With It. So if you listen to Roll With It and then you listen to Purple Parallelogram, the melodies are the same. But that was the original kind of version of it. It became Roll With It, and it became the song that went head-to-head with Blur's Country House, Kev. So a wee bit of trivia there, but I'm not a massive fan of Roll With It. In fact, I think Purple Parallelogram's a better song.
I only see Roll With It in a football context now.
Let's talk about the football context.
I can only see it in a football context now.
Patrice Loco, PSG, best team you have ever seen in a European sense at Celtic Park. So tell me about it, and tell me about the genesis of Celtic's relationship with Roll With It.
Basically, 95, Al left St Ninians on the Tommy Craig CSC to drive to Paris on the bus. And I had my Walkman with me, and Oasis would have been on the Walkman because...
The Walkman. The Walkman, with extra batteries and
C90 and all of that, the Walkman, loads of Buckfast, beer, you name it. And so we drove to Paris.
Were you into your bucky?
Aye, I was. Aye.
Do you miss it?
No, not at all. Not at all. So got to Paris, hung about, went to the game. My memories of the game, it was a shady area of Paris. The Frances in a very, very shady area of Paris. The stadium was quite run down. But at half time, to make the travelling support feel at home, they played Country House and Roll With It.
Yeah.
And the Celtic fans sung both. We did sing both. We really did. But Roll With It seemed to have stuck. A lot of people just say, we only sung Roll With It. We sung both, definitely.
But Roll With It stuck. And a lot of people associate it with the 6-2 game. Because Noel Gallagher's at the game, we sing it. Noel Gallagher thinks we're singing it for him. No, we've been singing it for a few years.
I'm the League Cup final, Janssen, 97.
For the United,
At Ibrox. Then...
Do you know who's got that match ball?
No.
Kevin Miles.
What's it?
They booted it into the crowd after the game, and I think either him, his brother, or his dad caught the ball and kept it. Still got it. So that is the connection between Roll With It and Celtic, and you would expect it to, because it has re-emerged in recent times, you would expect that to be something that comes and goes depending on the mood of the time. I'm going to bring this up because this is a pal of ours, James Lafferty, who again did an unplugged session with us back in the day, in the Stirling days, which is on the channel. And he's saying, wish they would do Hey Now. I'm sorry, James. Kevin's dropped it off the album, mate. He's dropped Hey Now for whatever. So you can take that up with him. Kevin, I know that you like kind of the more obscure side of music and art and literature. So the next two songs, right, and you can't slag them off, Kev, because that means you've slagged off the first 4 songs on this album, are the 2 big crossover tracks that really made them, they were already mainstream, but in terms of even the American audience, this was radio play, went through the roof with both Wonderwall and Don't Look Back in Anger. It's difficult to listen to them, you know, with a fresh perspective because we've heard both songs so many times, Kev. But these 2 songs were huge at the time. And I'm going to ask you to go back to the 19-year-old Kevin Graham. When you've managed to get through Hello, you knew Roll With It, wasn't it your favourite song? And then Wonderwall comes on. That strum of the guitar, the lyric backbeat, the word is on the street. It was special at the time. I know that in time and the millions of times you've heard it changes your perspective of the song. But these 2 songs were massive for Oasis. Huge, huge, big tracks. You're not going to slag them off, are you?
Aye. I detest Wonderwall with every fibre of my being.
Kevin.
It is stoned nonsense. The lyrics, the whole, after all, you're my Wonderwall.
It's
and
beautiful.
I think it's just over familiarity with it.
I think
It's
so.
completely over familiarity with it. It's the fact there's guys who buy Top Gear albums will have Wonderwall on it and they'll love Wonderwall, and I think I just hate what it actually stands for. And I'm quite glad that none of them do it. It was bigger than what it should have been.
It was over familiarity though, because it was on the airwaves and it was non-stop, right? But if you look at it, right, let's do it a wee bit differently then. Let's look at it as a single, as a wee bit, a nugget, a single that came out at that time with that tremendous Brian Cannon artwork. And it's Anita Herriot that's on the front, who worked in the creation offices. And there's the frame, beautiful artwork. It was meant to be, or it was going to be Liam. There's a picture of Liam in the frame. No, didn't want that. So they got Anita, who worked in the creation offices, to come down and took the photo there. And let's look at, correct me if I'm wrong, the B-sides of this particular single, Kevin, were Round Our Way, the Swamp Song, and the Master Plan. So there's the 4 tracks. There's a different way to look at it. So as a standalone song, yeah, you're over familiar with it. As a single, mate, it's a classic. Am I selling it to you? The B-sides. The B-sides.
Aye, as a 4-pack.
Yeah, as an EP almost. Yeah.
Aye, it's fine, but then the Master Plan's far better, eh?
I agree with that. I agree.
The
I
Master
would not
Plan
disagree.
Is far, far better. So,
it's in the top 3 songs that Noel has ever written, the Master Plan, and it was on the B-side of Wonderwall. I think another one of them actually is Acquiesce, which was on Some Might Say, which comes later on. Right, so we're 3 tracks in.
If you're replacing Hello with Acquiesce.
Oh, 100%.
You're replacing Hello with Acquiesce.
No doubt. I agree with you. I would 100% do that. I'd also remove the 2 wee segments, the wee rackets, the wee segments. I'd remove them. I would remove She's Electric. I would keep Hey Now. But in terms of this album, Kevin Graham's sitting here in his record offices. He's listened to the opening 3 tracks of What's the Story, and he's slagging them off, and he's no signing the band. Does it change on track 4? Don't Look Back in Anger.
I love Don't Look Back in Anger.
Thank God for that.
It's one of these songs that, even though it became the same as Wonderwall, overplayed, it hasn't got old over time. I can still hear it now. Maybe it was the whole Manchester thing a couple of years back, and when it kind of took on a different meaning and stuff like that. But Don't Look Back in Anger, again, it's probably because it's a familiarity to earlier on with the sort of Imagine piano and all of that. And I think Liam made an absolute mistake by no singing it, because Noel gave him the choice. You can either sing Wonderwall or that. Mm-hmm. He chose that. And I think Noel got the far better song with it.
Well, again, I would have liked to have heard versions of both, to be fair. A Liam sang version and a Noel sang version of Wonderwall. I've got to say as well, Wonderwall, another version of that I like is Ryan Adams' version. It's very good. So good, in fact, that Noel started singing the Ryan Adams version of Wonderwall live for a long time, didn't he? The lyric, So Sally Can Wait, was actually, that came from Liam. You've probably heard that story, Kev. So he's been listening to it, I think, at a sound check, and he thought he heard Noel singing So Sally Can Wait, that whole Sally Cinnamon thing, and that became the lyric. I would also say, we've already said that the album's not a great lyrical album, but I would reckon, correct me if you disagree, that the best lyric is on this song. And the best lyric, the one that I like the most, is where he sings, stand up beside the fireplace, take that look from off your face.
Aye.
And I'm not sure if it was maybe Paul Gallagher that said that that's the three boys in the Gallagher household as kids, and Peggy telling them to go and stand up by the fireplace so she could take a picture of them, take that look from off your face, so that she get a picture of them stand by the fireplace.
Wonderwall's got a halo, it's got a whiff of a weak old hippie romanticism, and Don't Look Back in Anger is 1970s, 80s nostalgia. It's about time gone past. It's basically one of these songs that you can be sitting there with a wee drama or something like that, and you listen to Don't Look Back in Anger, and there'll be tears rolling down your face.
Is it something that is such a well kind of like sold state of mind? Don't look back in anger, and we all know that should be the way we live our lives, but many of us don't, Kev. We do keep resentments and all that kind of stuff. So when you hear the lyrics, you think it's right, but I'm still going to hold that grudge. You know what I mean? So there's a wee bit of that regret, I guess, when you're listening to it. I'm delighted that you like at least one of the songs on the album. So let's move on to the fifth one. Oh, wait a minute, you've dropped that. Hey, now.
Dropped that.
I think it's underrated. I think Suey will agree with me. James Lafferty, who was in on the comments, will agree with that. Great to see you, Donny boy. Hope you're well. Seen Bowie live. One of the artists I regret never seen live. Donny boy seen him live when he was 16, and a real star, sadly missed. It's strange because I grew up, my dad was a big Bowie fan, Ziggy Stardust, and I always kind of thought I'll get round to seeing him, Kev, and it never happened. You know what I mean? Which was very, very unfortunate. I'm bringing this up as well because it's relevant to the album, Forever and Ever Celtic. Living and working in London at the time, met Paul Weller in a chippy close to Earl's Court. Wee geezer with big, thick eyebrows, Noel Gallagher alongside him, barely noticed them. Noel surrounded himself, Kev, both when he was a roadie in Spiral Carpets and beyond, with other musicians. So he knew Johnny Marr before Oasis got a record deal. He obviously had toured with Inspirals, and he knew the real people, and he knew Lee Mavers. And Paul Weller was another guy that very quickly became his mate. And Paul Weller, did I say Paul Weller or Paul Gallagher? Paul Weller appears on this album on Champion Supernova, and that kind of friendship has continued ever since. I think Weller's been an amazing, a hugely big influence on Noel Gallagher, and in particular his solo career, Kev.
I must admit, I'm a massive Jam fan and Style Council, but I've never really took to Weller's solo stuff. Never. I mean, obviously,
none of it.
That time,
none of it. Because it's changed, the sound has changed, the approach has changed.
95, round about that time, what was the album? But the album was Sunflower and that on it. The album announced his comeback, basically.
Well, he had the Paul Weller album, then it was Wildwood, and then it was Stanley Road.
Right, Stanley Road.
Stanley Road had quite a few big hits on it.
Aye, I always remember that. I never owned the album, but again, it was one of the circles I was going about, and I heard it quite a few times, and it didn't give me the urge to run and switch it off and throw the hi-fi out the window, which is luckily for the person's hi-fi it was, unlike Robert Miles' children. But that's another story. But that's
a piano house classic.
Oh, not when you hear it 13 times in a row, isn't it?
It depends on your level of sobriety or otherwise, I guess.
I think what you're actually seeing at that point, Noel's moved to London.
Yeah.
He's gone out with a girl at that point, hanging around with Kate Moss and all of that. Everything's cool, everything's trendy. And
Supernova Heights.
Folk are gravitating towards Supernova Heights. But if you actually look at it, it's exactly what you say. He always had links in the music industry.
Yeah.
He always knew guys that knew guys, and he always, like, the discovery and how some things happen wasn't a big mistake.
Well,
there's too many coincidences.
You're coming on Friday night. Right. So basically the situation is, I'm a huge Oasis fan. If someone had told me at the time that this album was to come out that eventually I would interview Tony McCarroll, Bonehead, Brian Cannon and Alan McGee, I wouldn't believe you. It would be like mind-blowing stuff. But I'm going to be interviewing Alan McGee on Friday night. Now, there's a section on that evening, Kev, as you know, because you've been to the Sean Ryder gig and Martin O'Neill and various others, that I throw the opportunity out to the audience to ask McGee a question. And I will be bitterly disappointed when you get your opportunity to say, it wasn't a luck when you signed him at King Tut's and all this stuff, because you're going to be given your opportunity. In fact, I'm going to pinpoint, you know how blind I am. I'll get the spotlight on you and say, right, Kev, you've got a question. Up you come. Ask Alan McGee the question yourself. James, he's back in. No Gallagher remix of Do You Know What I Mean was class. Totally agree with that. I love to remix it acoustic and piano as Be Here Now naked. Well, you said something really interesting. No was meant to go through the entire album and redo it, the Be Here Now album, for was it the 20th anniversary maybe, or something like that. And he got bored after the first track, so he just scrapped it, and then that was released as a standalone track. There's then that wee untitled bit. I would have got rid of that. That was just filler. I wasn't big on that. That was just filler, swamp song, followed by Some Might Say, which was the band's first number one, and the last song that Tony McCarroll drummed on. I remember Noel specifically saying that he didn't think Tony could play the drum parts on Don't Look Back in Anger, and he knew it was going to be a massive hit, and he knew that Tony couldn't do it. But as you said earlier, read Tony's book. But Some Might Say is a song, Kev. It reminded me a wee bit of Cigarettes and Alcohol. The guitar line, anyway.
I love Some Might Say. I think if you want every ingredient of an Oasis song in 4.5 minutes, it's Some Might Say. Nonsense lyrics, glam stomp, punk attitude, bit of the Beatles, bit of psychedelia chucked in. Nonsense lyrics is top, as Johnny W. is top tier, man. I love some. I think if he says to somebody, "What did Oasis sound like?" you should play them Some Might Say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. Totally get it. I love the front cover as well. Sean McManus, Be Here Now, got a lot of negative press for whatever reason, but it's still something that I'd go and listen to. Well, Kevin and I will be listening to it tomorrow because we're going to be discussing Oasis's third album tomorrow night, same time, same place. Join us tomorrow at 7:00. Plunge McNugget silencers were great. Yeah, I've told the story before. My old fella got into them because after the pit shut down, he had to go and get work elsewhere, and he ended up working all over the world. He would come back with all these Glaswegian bands on CD, Kev, and the silencers, because he worked with a lot of Glaswegians, the silencers were one of them. So that was the soundtrack to a lot of my youth as well. So eventually working with JJ Gilmour was a great thrill for me. Also, Cast No Shadow then comes up. It was dedicated to Richard Ashcroft, who's more or less washed his hands with the song though, Kev, because I didn't think him and Noel get on.
It's a cracking song. The album picks up in the second half. It really does pick up in the second half. If kick out the Swamp Song, then you've got Some Might Say. You add in Rocking Chair somewhere. You add in Rocking Chair in there somewhere. Then you go to Cast No Shadow, which is far better than Wonderwall. Far better than Wonderwall.
I heard the version of it that's on the Goal soundtrack. There's a soundtrack, I think it was the original movie Goal, which I've never seen, but I've got the soundtrack. And there's a few wee gems on that. There's a song by Happy Mondays that was never released anywhere else. It wasn't a B-side. It wasn't on an album. It was a song that only appeared on the soundtrack. And then there was an Oasis song called Who Put the Weight of the World on Your Shoulders. Have you ever heard that? So it didn't appear anywhere else, but it's on that soundtrack. But there's a version of Cast No Shadow on that as well, which is excellent. But yeah, it is one of the best songs on there, Kev. When you listen back to the album, it stood the test of time. Followed by She's Electric, which I'm going to put in the same category as Diggsy's Dinner. I wouldn't have had it on the album when you've got Acquiesce and you've got The Master Plan. Absolutely no chance would ever, I would have She's Electric on this album. And then the final two tracks on the album, if you forget the other untitled one, Morning Glory and Champagne Supernova. Morning Glory, I remember the lyric, all your dreams are made when you're chained to the mirror, and the razor blade being argued away by Noel, who said it was about, having a 9 to 5 and being chained to the mirror because you're having a shave every morning. I think we both know that that's not the case, Kevin. But this done a lot of good for them in America. It was released as an American single, got them loads of airplay. And when you listen back to it, it's like you say, it's a very strong second half of the album, and Morning Glory is a big part of that.
It is a big part of it. I mean, it does sound like an REM song, and I can't remember off the top of my head what REM song it actually is.
What's the frequency, Kenneth?
No, it's got the same chord sequences.
Love that song.
I can't remember. Somebody will hang with it. And it's even though there's a familiarity about this song, it's an absolute Oasis classic. What's the story? Morning Glory. Need a little time to wake up. Hangover years. It's a song. I see it as a song about hedonism, but it was quite weird. Did you ever see it? There was a programme on Channel 4. It used it. It was about Glasgow, about sectarianism in Glasgow, and that was the song that they used. What's the story, Morning Glory?
Is that right? I can't remember that. I'd need to dig that out.
It's a fantastic song. It's a week song. I love it. I really do. Then you've got into Champagne Supernova, which is
psychedelia.
I agree with that. Some might say sounds awesome to this day on a jukebox. Absolutely, it does.
It does. And then, you know what? It's at that point that you think, forget all the nonsense and forget what the perfect lineup is. Just get the band back together. Morning Glory, Champagne Supernova, of course, on that particular song, Paul Weller appears. Bonehead's Bank Holiday appeared on the vinyl version and some of the imports of this particular album, Kevin. Step Out was dropped at the last minute because Stevie Wonder was looking for huge royalties from the album. And I'm pretty sure Noel's glad that he dropped it. He did not do what Richard Ashcroft did. Richard Ashcroft knew what the ramifications were going to be by keeping in Bittersweet Symphony and that particular wee orchestral loop in there, Kev. But Noel Gallagher probably, thought about the money and said, I'm going to drop Step Out. So that couldn't be on the album. You said it should be on the album. Did you say it should be on the album?
No,
it was whatever.
I'm just pointing out it was lazy songwriting, and something that he had a tendency to do at that time was to make his influences very, very clear by stealing whole parts of the song and being very
blatant. It was Supersonic, didn't he? T-Rex. Right, so let's run through the B-sides before we wrap up for tonight. Talk Tonight, Acquiesce, Head Shrinker, It's Better People, Rocking Chair, Round Our Way, The Swamp Song, The Master Plan, Step Out, eventually made it onto Don't Look Back in Anger, Underneath the Sky, and Come On, Feel the Noise, the single that was a cover by Slade, of course. Unbelievable album. I've already given you my best lyric as well. One final song, one final question, Kev. Should they have quit after Nebworth? Don't do it with hindsight. At the time, were you looking at them going, right, you can't get any bigger than this, just quit?
No, you wanted them to continue at that point.
You wanted another album, of course you did.
Because you're still living in that, like, everything's better, but even though, like, you realise quite quickly after it that it absolutely peaked at like, the downward slope was after that battle, the Blood and Oasis battle. Everything had peaked up until then, and everything from that point, it was just manufactured commercialism, and it just got overblown nonsense, and that's what the whole Britpop thing is. And Nebworth is a final stop in that period. But from that battle, from the Blood and Oasis battle, I think even the music started going downhill because there was a lot of Xeroxes kicking about.
I mean, what that sounds like.
Aye, and when you get to 97 as well, You look at the albums that were Be Here Now was released in '97. And it probably was I was mere listening at that point. You had Urban Hymns by the Verve and Spiritualised Ladies and Gentlemen. We Are Floating in Space both came out that year. Music changed in that 2 year. I think Britpop really done enough. Really reached its downhill slope was the Blur and Oasis battle. That's when everything started going wrong. But I can see why on the Nebworth stuff that they look back on it now and go, we should have stopped her.
Joe Guest running about in Blur's video. You remember like Benny Hill? It was like a Benny Hill sketch and all that kind of nonsense. I wouldn't even put the Verve in the same category or genre. I know it was more of the music mags that did that, Kev, but the Verve for me were just a great rock band. Bit of Pink Floyd psychedelia tinged in there as well. Never a Britpop band for me. Britpop was a completely different vibe, and I don't think the Verve were part of that. They were a darker band, weren't they? But the favourite Oasis cover, says Brian Webster, was Hey Hey, My. You know what Ming's was? Ming's was Heroes. It was a B-side on it was a B-side on Do You Know What I Mean? Brilliant, absolutely brilliant version of Heroes. And I think there was also a song on there called Angel Child, as well as Stay Young. I mean, there were some brilliant B-sides, which we'll talk about tomorrow, Kev. We'll wrap it up there. Yes, Oasis, should they, should not get back together? I can tell you, if they announced a gig at Nebworth, I would be there. I would much rather see them playing at Celtic Park. We're doing a couple of Oasis shows ourselves this week, Kevin and I, on the relaunched Screamacelica. I might do this more often, Kev. I've really enjoyed it.
Definitely.
Yeah, because I am going to speak to Alan McGee this Friday night, not only about Oasis, but about some of the other incredible bands that he signed or managed when he was a label boss at Creation, from, Primal Scream to My Bloody Valentine to the Jesus and Mary Chain, Teenage Fan Club, Super Funny Animals, Ride, Saint Etienne, it goes on and on. Ride, superb band.
Right.
We see them that night when they supported Mogwai, didn't we? We were both at that gig.
Yes, right. They were very decent that night as well.
They were excellent. So thanks everybody for getting involved. Is Screamacelica something you want to see more regularly? Let us know. And if it is, then Kevin and I might do it a wee bit more often, because we love a wee natter about Celtic and music. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. If you want to come along and meet us on Friday night, buy a ticket. I think there was something like 20 odd available earlier on today. Right? 20 odd left. It's going to be a sellout, and it's going to be a great night. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Thank you, Kevin Graham, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.